You ever read a message so cold, so calculated, that your whole body goes still, not from heartbreak, but from a kind of clarity? It was a quiet Tuesday morning. I was standing at the sink, still in my robe, washing the last of the breakfast dishes. The sunlight was soft, the kitchen warm, and my phone buzzed. Just once, I wiped my hands on a towel, picked it up, thinking it was a sale alert or a grocery app reminder. But instead it was him. And the words I read: "I can't do this anymore, Jessica. I need a real partner, not a worthless, lazy burden. I'm filing for divorce. Don't call me, I've made up my mind." Now, most people would expect a woman in my position to fall apart, beg, panic. But I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because Nathan thought he was dropping the final word in our story. He had no idea. I was just about to begin the first chapter of his downfall. You see, my husband never asked questions. He assumed I was just some housewife who'd given up on ambition, who sat at home all day doing nothing while he built a future for us. But what Nathan never bothered to realize was that the very company he spent years working for, the one he proudly climbed the ladder in, it was mine. And by the time he walked into the office the next morning, chest out and ego high, he had no idea he'd be meeting his new boss, his soon-to-be ex-wife, me. Let me tell you what really happened, because trust me, this isn't just a story about revenge. It's about recognition. It's about what happens when a woman stops letting the world decide her worth and starts defining it for herself. He called me a burden, so I signed his paycheck. Then I signed his termination letter. Let's go back to where it all began. You'd think the end of a marriage would come with shouting, maybe a slammed door, or some dramatic scene in a lawyer's office. But for me, came as a text message. I was standing at the kitchen sink, hands in warm soapy water, rinsing the last of the breakfast dishes. There was soft jazz playing from the living room. The sunlight filtered through the curtains just right, like it was any other peaceful morning. Then my phone buzzed. One buzz, one screen, one message that pulled the floor out from under everything we'd built. "I can't do this anymore, Jessica. I need a real partner, not a worthless, lazy burden. I'm filing for divorce. Don't call me, I've made up my mind." I just stood there, water dripping from my hands. And you know what's strange? I didn't cry. I didn't yell. Just breathe. Because deep down, I knew this moment had been coming. Not because I had changed, but because he stopped seeing me a long time ago. You see, Nathan, my husband of 6 years, had grown more resentful ever since I took a step back from my career to deal with stress-related health issues. I wasn't lounging around. I was healing. I was regrouping. But to him, if I wasn't clocking in at an office, I wasn't worth anything. He'd say things like, "Must be nice to have all day to do nothing," or, "I wish I could just quit life like you." First I thought he was joking, but the thing about little jabs is, they add up, and eventually they hit bone. So when I read his message, it didn't break me. It confirmed what I had slowly come to accept. He didn't see my value, but that didn't mean I didn't have any. And here's where this part of the story matters, because maybe someone watching right now has been made to feel like they don't count, like their rest isn't valid, like their worth depends on how productive they look on the outside. Let me tell you something from experience. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay still and let the storm pass, while you quietly prepare your comeback. And mine, it was coming faster than Nathan could ever imagine. Because the man who called me lazy was about to discover that I was the one signing his paycheck. Let me show you how it all unfolded. Nathan loved to call himself the provider. He'd puff out his chest whenever the topic of work came up. At dinner parties he'd drop lines like, "Jessica's lucky. I handle the bills so she can focus on whatever she does." And people would chuckle awkwardly. I'd smile politely, swallow the lump in my throat, and say nothing. He never asked what I did all day. Never wondered why our finances were always stable, why the mortgage was paid early, or how we could afford those weekend getaways even when he claimed we were tightening the budget. To him, his job was the backbone of our life. What he didn't know, what he never took the time to notice, was that the very company he worked for was mine. I had been the silent owner for years. My father, may he rest in peace, handed the company to me after he stepped down due to health issues. I was young, sure, but I had vision, had drive, and I had the wisdom to hire a great executive team while I studied everything behind the scenes. But because I didn't walk out the door at 8 a.m. in a suit, because I wasn't part of his daily grind, Nathan assumed I had no purpose. He assumed wrong. And that's something I want to pause on for a second, because it's a story I've heard again and again, especially from women. You step back for your health. You take care of a loved one. You work from home or build something quietly, steadily, without showing it off on LinkedIn. And suddenly, you're not doing anything. But here's the truth. Work doesn't need to be loud to be valuable. And just because someone can't see your effort, doesn't mean it's not moving mountains behind the curtain. Nathan thought he was the provider. He thought I needed him. But what he never realized was that I let him believe that. And the difference between needing someone and choosing to love them freely is massive. So when he walked out that door, thinking I'd collapse without him, I was already preparing his termination paperwork. Let me tell you how I walked into that building the next morning and flipped everything he believed upside down. The next morning, Nathan left early. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't even look at me. He just grabbed his keys, whistling as he walked out the front door, probably thinking how free he finally was from the lazy burden he'd written off the day before. I stood by the window, watched him pull out of the driveway, then turned to head upstairs. Because in exactly 1 hour, I'd be walking into that same building he thought he ruled. Except I wouldn't be sitting in sales. I'd be sitting at the top. It had been nearly a year since I last stepped foot in my company's corporate headquarters. After taking a quiet sabbatical to reset, I let the executive team handle the day-to-day. But now it was time to remind everyone, especially one person in particular, who built this kingdom. I walked through the front doors in a navy blazer and low heels. No fuss, no press, just purpose. The receptionist looked up and smiled. "Jessica, welcome back." I nodded calm. "It's good to be home." My office was just as I had left it. A bit dustier maybe, but the view, still stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a city skyline bathed in early morning light. The kind of view that made you feel like anything was possible if you just kept your head down and played the long game. I took a deep breath, sat down and opened my inbox. And there it was, waiting. A folder marked Employee Termination Review. Clicked it open, scrolled, and found the name that mattered most. Nathan Reynolds, Head of Sales Division. Now I know what you might be thinking. That's cold. But let me say this wasn't revenge. Not really. It was accountability. Because Nathan hadn't just disrespected me. He'd been running his department like a dictatorship, belittling junior staff, missing performance targets, misusing company resources, and skating by on charm and ego. And the only reason no one had called him out yet was because they didn't know I was watching. Here's the thing. Sometimes you have to let someone climb as high as they think they can. Not so you can pull them down, but so they reveal who they really are on their own. That morning I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plot revenge. I simply sent a message to my assistant. Tell him to come see me. Now. Because the man who thought he could walk away from me like I was nothing, was about to walk into his boss's office and realize he had never been in control at all. And trust me, you're going to want to hear what happened when he opened that door. When Nathan walked into the building that morning, I imagine he felt invincible. He probably strutted through the lobby like he always did, greeting the front desk with his usual wink and that smug little grin, thinking the world was his to conquer. What he didn't know was that he was walking straight into his own reckoning. My assistant knocked gently on my door. "Jessica, he's here." I stood up, smoothing the front of my blazer, heart steady, breath calm. This wasn't about drama. It was about truth. "Send him in." A moment later the door opened. Nathan walked in like he owned the place, until his eyes landed on me. For a split second I saw it. That flicker of confusion, then disbelief, then something colder, fear. "Jessica?" he asked like he was seeing a ghost. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Have a seat." He didn't move at first. Pride had its grip tight on him, but curiosity or maybe ego won out. He sat. "What is this?" he asked, crossing his arms. I smiled gently. "This is your quarterly review." He let out a breathy laugh like this had to be some elaborate prank. "You don't even work here," he scoffed. I tilted my head. "That's funny. Because I believe you report directly to me." He leaned forward. "You're telling me you own this company?" "No," I said, keeping my tone soft. "I'm telling you I always have." He went quiet. His eyes darted around the room, at the logo on the wall, the nameplate on my desk, the folders spread neatly in front of me. Then came the spiral. He accused me of lying. He said I forged documents. He even tried to twist it into me using the divorce to punish him. But the truth was sitting right there in black and white. Ownership records, board minutes, his own signature on performance warnings. Signed off by my executive team. And when he finally went quiet, when he could no longer deny the mountain of evidence before him, I slid one last folder across the desk. "This," I said, "is your termination letter. And here's the thing I want to pause on. Power isn't about yelling. It's not about revenge or domination. Real power. It's being so grounded in who you are that someone else's opinion, even someone who once lived in your house, can't shake you anymore." I didn't fire Nathan because he hurt my feelings. I fired him because he failed. As a leader, as a teammate, as a man who thought cruelty was confidence. He stood up, red-faced, muttering threats and curses under his breath. I stayed seated. Security met him at the door. And just like that, the man who called me a burden was escorted out of my company like a disgraced employee. But trust me, Nathan wasn't done yet. Not by a long shot. Because the moment he realized he couldn't fight me inside the building, he tried to destroy me from the outside. Let's talk about what happened after the headlines started flying, and how the internet got a front row seat to the truth. Nathan didn't take it well. To be honest, I didn't expect him to. He stood there in my office, holding his termination letter like it had personally insulted him. His face flushed red. His jaw clenched. And then he said the one thing that made me realize just how little he'd ever understood me. "You're doing this because of the divorce. This is personal." I looked up from my desk, calm as ever, and said, "No, Nathan. This is professional. But let's not pretend. It doesn't feel incredibly satisfying." He tried to argue. He demanded reasons. So I gave him facts, not feelings. I listed the formal complaints from his team. Undermining junior staff. Missed targets for 3 straight quarters. Inappropriate comments in meetings. Even misuse of company funds disguised as client entertainment. And lastly, I read out the one that mattered most. Disrespect toward the company's owner. He flinched. Just a little. Like his body finally caught up to what his pride refused to accept. Now let me pause here for a moment because this is important. There's a difference between revenge and consequence. I didn't fire Nathan to get back at him. I fired him because if anyone else on my team had behaved the way he did, they'd be out the door, no second chances. And fairness means holding even the people closest to us to the same standard. Too often we let things slide in the name of love or history or keeping the peace. But peace built on silence. It's not peace. It's slow self-erasure. Nathan threatened legal action. He swore he'd sue me for wrongful termination. My lawyers were ready before he even sent the email. We had a full case file, thoroughly documented, just waiting. Because unlike him, I believe in being prepared. Let him rant. Let him plot. What Nathan still didn't understand was that this wasn't just a woman scorned. This was a CEO cleaning house. And if you think this part was explosive, Just wait until you see what happened after Nathan went public. Because the moment he realized he'd lost power in private, he tried to reclaim it on social media. Let's pause for a second because I want to hear from you. And trust me, this is the part where everything Nathan thought he knew unravels completely. Before we go any further, I want to hear from you. How would you feel if someone you loved, someone who once said they'd stand by you, turned around and called you a burden? Would you stay quiet? Would you fight back? Or would you, like Jessica, choose dignity and power? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, what's the most shocking part of this story so far? And have you ever been underestimated, only to rise higher than they ever imagined? I'll be reading through them. Let's keep this conversation going. Now, let's get back to the story, because Nathan's reckoning, oh, it's only just begun. That evening, I was curled up on the living room couch with a glass of wine when the front door slammed open. Nathan stormed in like a man on fire. His tie was loose, his eyes wild, and the first words out of his mouth were, "What the hell is going on, Jessica? HR is investigating me. People are whispering. I'm being accused of fraud." I didn't even flinch. I set my glass down gently and looked up at him. "You mean the consequences of your behavior? That's what's going on?" He shouted. He called it a witch hunt, said I was trying to ruin his life. But then something shifted. The rage, it cracked. And beneath it, for the first time, I saw it. Fear. Pure, unfamiliar fear. He looked at me, eyes pleading now. "This isn't happening. Tell me this isn't happening." I stood slowly and said, "Oh, it's happening. And it's been happening for a while, Nathan. You just never noticed." And that's when I realized the truth. Nathan wasn't blindsided by my success. He was blindsided by his own blindness. He never asked, not once. He never asked how I was doing when I stepped away from my day-to-day work. He never asked what I was building behind the scenes. He never asked why I always seemed just fine, even without his so-called support. He assumed. He assumed silence meant dependence, that staying home meant doing nothing, that being quiet meant being small. And that's the danger of unchecked ego, isn't it? It builds an entire world in a vacuum, one where the other person is nothing more than a prop in your success story. Nathan liked the idea of me being beneath him, because it made him feel taller. But the truth, I was never behind him. I was beside him. He just never turned his head to look. So I finally told him everything. How my father had left me the company when his health declined. How I'd spent years learning the business from the ground up, hiring a team, letting him believe whatever he needed to feel important, because I didn't need the credit. I gave him the truth. Every last bit of it. And Nathan, he couldn't breathe. And here's the lesson I took from that night, one I hope someone out there needs to hear. If they never ask about your dreams, if they never care what you're building, if they're only ever comfortable when you're small, that's not a partner. That's a mirror for their own insecurity. And the moment you start standing fully in your light, they'll either shrink away from it, or try to tear you down. Nathan tried to do both. And when that didn't work, he ran to the one place where arrogance and pity can go viral fast. The internet. And oh, it did. The next morning, I was halfway through my first sip of coffee when my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Call after call. Ping after ping. At first, I thought something had happened at the office. But when my assistant's name flashed across the screen, I knew. This wasn't a fire drill. This was Nathan. She sounded breathless. "Jessica, you need to check social media. Right now." I opened my laptop, clicked onto the first trending post. And there it was. Nathan, front and center, with a caption designed to make him look like the broken hero of some tragedy. Betrayed by the woman I loved. She fired me, blacklisted me, and left me with nothing after everything I gave her. He wrote about how I pretended to love him, how I humiliated him in front of colleagues, how I destroyed his life out of spite. And for a few hours, it worked. Comments poured in. "You deserve better, bro. Another man ruined by a cold, heartless woman. This is what happens when women get power. Stung. Not because it was true, but because I knew that kind of lie spreads fast. But then something happened. Tide turned. Quiet at first, then louder. A woman replied with a screenshot of the HR memo about Nathan's investigation. A former employee came forward, someone he'd once bullied out of a promotion, sharing emails, time-stamped and undeniable. Then Ben, the one he stole a project from, dropped his receipts, showing how Nathan had erased his name from a proposal and claimed it as his own. And then, someone found our prenup. Public record. Posted it. Broke it down line by line. So let me get this straight, the tweet read. Jessica owned her company before marriage. Nathan signed a prenup. He cheated. Got fired for fraud. And now he's the victim. And just like that, the internet did its thing. People started deleting their earlier comments. Defenders went quiet. Truth had entered the chat. And honestly, I didn't have to say a word, because the receipts spoke louder than anything I could have ever posted. And here's the thing about stories, especially the ones that go viral. The ones built on lies may burn bright at first, but the ones built on truth, they endure. Nathan had spent years crafting a version of reality where he was always the hero. But real life isn't a highlight reel. Eventually the full picture shows up. And when it did, he wasn't the wounded husband anymore. He was just exposed. But even with his image falling apart online, Nathan still had one last card to play. Because when the world wouldn't give him pity, he came crawling back to me. Let's talk about how rock bottom can still have a trapdoor. And what happened when Nathan tried to reclaim the future he thought I'd taken from him. They say pride comes before the fall. But in Nathan's case, pride was the fall. Because after the internet had its say, after the truth shredded every lie he tried to spin, after the receipts had gone viral and sympathy turned to silence, Nathan finally did what I never expected. He texted me, "Jessica, we need to talk. Please." I didn't respond. Not out of anger. Not out of pettiness. But because by that point, there was nothing left to say. I had spent years trying to be heard. Now the world was listening. And he couldn't stand the silence. Later that day, my assistant popped into my office with a look she couldn't quite hide, somewhere between shock and barely contained amusement. "Jessica," she said, "you're gonna want to see this." She handed me a resume. I glanced down at the name. Nathan Reynolds. He had applied for a mid-level sales position at one of our subsidiary companies. Clearly, he didn't realize it was under our umbrella. His resume had been stripped down. No mention of why he left his last job. No glowing references. Just a desperate attempt to start over. And here's what hit me in that moment. Nathan hadn't just lost his job. He had lost his reputation. When HR teams across the industry saw the way he'd weaponized social media, the misconduct records, the poor leadership history, they didn't see a man seeking redemption. They saw a liability. No one wanted the drama. No one wanted the risk. He hadn't just burned bridges. He'd blown up the road. And here's the quiet truth behind all of this. Something I hope lands gently if you've ever been underestimated. Sometimes the people who put you down the most are the ones who secretly fear what you're capable of. So they control, they mock, they diminish, until one day they push too far. And you rise anyway. And when you do, they're not just shocked by your strength. They're terrified by the reflection it casts on their own weakness. Nathan tried to destroy me, but all he really did was destroy the version of himself that the world used to believe in. And me, I was just getting started. The boardroom was quiet. Too quiet. A single chair sat across from the hiring manager's seat, a pitcher of water beside it, untouched. The air felt stiff, like it knew something awkward was about to unfold. And sitting in that chair, in a wrinkled suit 2 sizes too big for his ego, was Nathan. He looked older, smaller, tired in a way that didn't come from lack of sleep, but from carrying the weight of everything he'd once refused to face. He had no idea I'd be walking in. The door creaked open and I stepped inside. The moment he looked up and saw me, the color drained from his face. "Jessica," I smiled softly. "Nathan, what a surprise." He stood halfway, like he wasn't sure whether to run or shake my hand. He did neither. I sat down across from him, calm as ever, and opened the folder with his resume. "Let's keep this professional," I said gently. "After all, you applied here so clearly. You must think I'm a fair boss." He tried to find words, any words. But for once, they didn't come easily. I flipped a page. "I see you left your last job off your resume. Any particular reason?" His jaw tensed. "Jessica, please." But I didn't let him fall back on guilt or pity. "Not today." "You wanted a second chance," I said. "Tell me, how many second chances did you give to the employees you sabotaged? The ones whose careers you stepped on?" Silence. "How many second chances did you give me when you called me a worthless burden and walked out the door?" He didn't answer. 'Cause there was no answer. Not one he could live with. And here's what I want to say to anyone listening, especially those who've been hurt, humiliated, or made to feel like their worth depended on someone else's validation. Dignity doesn't mean staying silent, but it does mean knowing when to rise above the noise. I could have hired Nathan, watched him flail under the leadership of the woman he once dismissed. I could have made his life miserable in a dozen quiet, legal, professional ways. But instead, smiled, closed the folder, and said, "I wouldn't hire you for a janitorial position, Nathan." He flinched just slightly. But he didn't argue. He knew. I stood up, walked to the door, and just before leaving I turned back to him. "Next time you call a woman a burden, make sure she isn't the one signing your paycheck." Then I walked out, leaving him with nothing but his regret. And I didn't look back. But this story, it doesn't end with his downfall. It ends with something far better. My own rise. 6 months later, I was sitting in my corner office, sun pouring in through the glass, a warm cup of coffee in hand. And I remember thinking, peace looks a lot like this. Our company had just closed a major international partnership. The press was calling it one of the biggest female-led business expansions of the year. Investors were excited. The team was thriving. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. I didn't just rebuild after Nathan. I evolved. Not out of spite, but out of freedom. Because once the weight of someone else's judgment is lifted, you begin to realize just how far you can rise when no one's clipping your wings. At a gala that fall, a journalist pulled me aside and asked, "Jessica, what's the secret to your success?" I smiled, sipped my champagne and said, "Never let someone else decide your worth. Especially not a man who's threatened by it." And that is the real story. Not just about a man who called me a burden. Not just about a woman who fired her husband. But about what happens when you stop asking for permission to be powerful. The best revenge was never destroying Nathan's life. It was building my own. Better, stronger, freer, and completely unapologetically mine. If this story spoke to you, I'd love to hear about it. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever surprised someone who thought they knew your worth? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's talk about it. Beach Balloon. And if you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. There's more where this came from. More soul stories. More justice. More second chances. Thanks for listening. Until next time, Jessica.